Joe, who's up next?
Next would be Mayor Elicker, followed
Thank
by
you, Mayor. Appreciate your being patient all day waiting for us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your stamina. This is impressive. And I know it's just one hearing. Representative McCarthy, Vahey, Senator Casano, ranking members Huang and Zulu, members of the committee. I'm here in strong support of SB 1024, which contains several vital provisions that will expand housing access in our state. I'm also very much appreciative and supportive of the work going into HB 6611. Connecticut is one of the most deeply segregated states in the nation, both as a result of history and contemporary policies that exacerbate economic and social inequality. The exclusionary zoning codes of so many Connecticut towns are perpetuating this. Using local government to dramatically restrict what housing is available, regardless of the significant demand for it, is having devastating implications for the residents of my city and our entire state. Artificial limitations on supply created by hyper-restrictive government regulations are driving up the cost of rent and making the state unaffordable for residents. It also reduces people's choices on where to live and limits the mobility of people trying to escape absentee or abusive landlords. SB 1024 is a thoughtful and moderate reform to quickly create more housing in the places that make the most sense, near transit and commercial corridors. It also removes some of the tools that have been used to make developing new housing options unnecessarily arduous. It, of course, does not solve the problem of segregation or racial inequity on its own, but it is an important step forward. There will be a lot of discussion about this bill, but I want to reinforce that we aren't here just for the sake of it. Black people have been systematically kept out of areas of greater opportunity. In many instances, zoning codes were and are still designed to keep white towns white and keep poor residents segregated to dense, underfunded areas of the state. Housing is one of the most effective tools to creating economic opportunity and mobility. That is why this tool has unfortunately been used throughout history to stop Black residents from accessing housing. The state has a moral responsibility to its residents to change the paradigm of racial segregation. It's bad for everyone and it's wrong. The concept of local control should not extend to keeping residents out or driving up the price of housing where they do live. I urge that you support this bill because it will create more opportunities for people who need them, and it will reduce the devastating impact segregation continues to have on all of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see we have Representative Dubitsky's hand raised. Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mayor Elicker, for coming in. You just said that zoning regulations are currently being used to keep people of color out. Name one.
So first of all, there's a history of this, of redlining, of deed restrictions. I think that was well said by Representative Thomas. And today, you look at the median income of white residents in Connecticut, it's around 84,000. Hispanic residents is around 46,000. Black residents is 43,000. There aren't explicit policies, but it is clear that it is near impossible for certain people to live in certain communities because of the zoning regulations.
Yeah, I can't live in Greenwich. I can't afford it. It has nothing to do with zoning. It has to do with my income. So you made a very blatant statement that there are that towns and cities in this state currently, as of today, are using zoning to discriminate against people of color and to keep them from moving into their towns. Name them.
I think it's quite clear that income is related to someone's ability to access housing and to move into places like Greenwich.
Well, of course it is. I can't move to Greenwich because I can't make enough money. It has nothing to do with the color of my skin. It has to do with my job. It has to do with my lifestyle. It has to do with my history. It has to do with my upbringing. It has to do with my family.
Representative Dubinsky, that is exactly my point. It has to do with your history just as it has to do with my history as a white person that grew up in a privileged background, that had enough funding, a stable house under my head to allow me the ability to get enough revenue to live in stable housing. The history of many, many Black people in the state of Connecticut and around the nation is just the opposite. And it's our responsibility, all of our responsibility, to work to undo that.
Okay,
And
but
housing is a
you're
vital
skirting the
way that we
question.
can do so.
You're skirting the question. The question is, you made a bold statement that there are towns currently, as of today, discriminating against people because of the color of their skin, by use of zoning regulations. So I challenge you, name those towns.
Representative Dubinsky, historically, it was done explicitly. Today, it is done in a more creative way, but it still exists.
Where?
In many of the suburban towns
Which ones?
in our state.
Which town?
Greenwich, New Canaan, you name it.
So Greenwich and New Canaan,
there
are now actively discriminating against people of color with their zoning regulations. Is that your statement?
Correct. There are many towns around the state that use zoning to prevent poor people, and including because average or median income is low for people of color, from moving into their towns.
Okay, but you're now mixing poor people and people of color. Are you saying that they're the same thing? That all?
No, I am
all
not,
poor
Representative
people are
Dubinsky,
people of
but
color?
the median income of Black residents and Hispanic residents in the state is much, much lower than the median income of white residents. The zoning policies are perpetuating segregation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm done with him.
Thank you, Representative. I see Representative Fiorello has her hand raised.
Hi, Mayor Elicker. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I can't help but I feel it begs the question, where is the evidence that Greenwich is using zoning rules to keep people of color out? Is that what you said, Mayor Elicker?
Yes, it is what I said. And
So what is your evidence for that?
I will repeat that historically it has been done very explicitly. Now it is done in a way that is more creative, but still perpetuates the issue where people of color are unable to access housing in many of our suburban towns.
Are you under the impression that Greenwich is all white?
No, I am not, but it is predominantly white.
It's actually 30% Hispanic. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of the specific statistics around Greenwich.
Okay, well, Greenwich is very diverse, as our first selectman attested. It's 27% non-white. So is that not enough? Or you made an incredible accusation against my town, and I'd like to understand how to wrap my mind around it. And please enlighten me. This is illegal activity, you know, to use zoning and to keep people of color out. I mean, this is absolutely illegal. So I'd like to understand.
There are implicit ways to do this, and there are not implicit ways to do this. And places like Greenwich and Woodbridge and New Canaan and other towns are using zoning to keep out communities of color. Let's be clear about it.
Okay, well, I guess if you keep saying it, I mean, you can keep saying it, it doesn't make it true. And unless you have real evidence to prove it, I think this is quite a statement for Mayor Elicker to be making against the town of Greenwich. So, okay, I'll have to come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I think Representative Lamar was up next.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker, for your testimony today and for joining us. And I want to just make sure we're clear here. The history of zoning isn't actually debated much. I mean, pretty much everyone on all sides of the history of zoning has recognized that the purpose of zoning was to segregate uses and people. That's not really debated, right? That is you're a former city plan commissioner. You've got a great background on this issue. The history of zoning, right? This isn't really debated, right?
Correct.
And communities used to explicitly deny access to people of color through other mechanisms, whether it's racially restrictive land covenants, redlining, federal home policies, housing policies that prohibited people of color expressly in their utilization. Is that correct?
Correct.
The Federal Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968 that said, hey, communities, you can do this. It wasn't until 1968 that passed. I mean, not that long ago. Up until that point in time, towns were oftentimes free to use whatever means necessary. There's countless studies of realtors and the realtor agency who has actually had to apologize over the last few decades for their role in steering people of color outside of certain communities. That's correct?
That's correct as well.
And so there isn't really any debate. This is widely acknowledged by literally everyone who studied this issue. I mean, and I know you're not supposed to say literally everyone, but actually I cannot find anyone who disagrees with that. And so I think we're not really discussing the historical use of zoning, the historical use of communities and lending institutions and the federal government in purposefully segregating our communities, right? And so we have this change in law in the last few decades that essentially says, well, now everything's fine. And a lot of folks want to say, we're not actively doing it. Can you point out a community that's actively doing it? Can you point to this community that's actively, purposefully precluding people of color from moving our community? And it's hard to say that that's a disingenuous question, but it begs the question of who was able to acquire generational wealth during all of those decades of American history that would allow you to purchase a 5,000 square foot home on multiple acres of land, which is the only allowable as of right development in so many communities across our country. Is that the point you're making, where folks aren't being explicitly racist, but the impact of sustaining that type of development and as of right planning versus any other type of housing development, that in its impact is what is racist? Is that correct?
It is correct. And I would add to that, you know, for example, the Black population in Greenwich is 3.7%. We should be working hard to undo that and take ownership for either explicit or implicit racism that exists in our society, and step forward into very modest proposals like the proposal that's in front of us to help bring our state to a more inclusive and integrated living environment so that we can engage with one another, meet one another, understand one another better, and take ownership for this history.
And I think that's right. I think that's a hard part for a lot of folks is, look, you and I, and maybe no one on this committee or no one in Connecticut currently at all had anything to do with the history on this issue, but we know about it. And I think you and I and many people on this committee, and thankfully the hundreds of people who submitted testimony, know that we have an obligation to correct it. And this very reasonable proposal before us does just that. And I am deeply thankful for your willingness to step forward on this issue and help articulate the opportunities we have as a state to move forward. Thank you, Mayor Elicker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lamar. Senator Lopes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lower my hand. I just want to speak quickly to some of the, how you doing, Mayor Elicker? Nice to see you again.
Senator Lopes.
Just want to speak to some of the questioning from Representative Fiorello and Davitsky on trying to differentiate. Well, let's start with, people get very sensitive about the word racism, and no one likes to be categorized as a racist, so it tends to heat up the blood a little bit and cause some contention. But I hope I can try to diffuse it a little bit here. I think what we're talking about, but the difference between implicit and explicit racism in the community, like some of the wealthier communities in Connecticut, Greenwich, New Canaan, et cetera, when we're saying that the zoning is being used, and correct me if I'm wrong, zoning is being used in a racist manner, we're not talking about it being used in a way that, in terms of bigotry. It's not the people of Greenwich, the people of New Canaan, Wilton, who are racist, bigoted people. What we're talking about, and I'm going to build upon the comments from Representative Lamar, is that because of the history of zoning, there's a structural racism component that has occurred with these communities that make it harder for people of lesser economic means to live there, and therefore, by extension, people of color who tend to, in this state and across most of the country, to have lesser means. Is that kind of the line of reasoning of what we're thinking about?
I think that's a fair way of explaining it.
Okay, because I've dug into this a little bit here, and I could see Representative Fiorello getting a little upset, and and it can come across that way where you're talking about like the actions of your town is racist, and you think, are you saying that the residents of the town are racist? No, absolutely not. It's that there's been history perpetuated by zoning laws that aren't changed year after year after year, which creates a structural component of racism. Very much less to do with the people of that community and much more to do with history and the way laws are perpetuated. And that's the purpose of these bills, is to attack that structural racism. It has nothing to do with the people, well, less to do with the people of the community, much more to do with how the laws have been created, how they've been used over the years, and we're hoping to create a little bit more equality in our state. But any comment on that, sir?
Senator Lopes, I just add that I do think it's important for us to look into our own biases internally and reflect on those as well, particularly given the events of the past year and having more deep conversations about what racism may exist that we may not have recognized before.
Absolutely. I mean, we are a racist society at some level. Every society is. And we have to confront ourselves on that fact and work for a better country and community. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I just want to make a couple of, well, I'm going to let Representative Fiorello go next. I just saw her hand pop up.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on Mayor Elicker's comment about having to look into our own souls with our biases, but there certainly seems to be a bias in Mayor Elicker against the town of Greenwich. And I appreciate Senator Lopez making a comment about the systemic racism. However, whether it's systemic or by the person, the accusation of racism using our laws to keep people out is a very serious one. And last time I checked, in this country, we are innocent before proven guilty. And I believe that a lot of the kinds of ways that these policies are going is towards an assumption of a lot of guilt on the side of people. And I have to say, there will be nothing that stops anyone of any skin tone from moving into any of these towns. It has to do with economics. Which brings us to the Fair Share Bill. So I wanted to ask Mayor Elicker, the Fair Share Bill is about, the taking on the fair share of the need for affordable housing. How is the housing affordability in the city of New Haven? And yes.
We provide 30% affordable housing in New Haven. On our housing authority, 30% of the people on our waiting list are from outside of New Haven. We actually very much want to provide more affordable housing for the community, but already we are subsidizing many of the neighboring communities because the waiting list is for people that do not live in New Haven, 30% of that waiting list to want to live in our city or anywhere where there's affordable housing.
Okay, so in a state with no population growth and no real projected population growth, new housing means that existing units will be vacated. So do these proposals that you're supporting will lead to people leaving New Haven, is that right?
No, that's not right. I just described that 30% of, there's thousands and thousands of people on the waiting list for New Haven's Housing Authority. And they currently don't have access to affordable housing. So there will not be this flood of people leaving our cities. It will be quite the opposite. People that are living in the suburbs in unaffordable housing now will have access to more affordable housing.
Okay, but most of the affordable housing that we're talking about, the flooding of the market, so-called, will happen outside the cities. So the people in the cities will come to those? That's not a correct assumption? There is no new housing to be built in the cities, is that right? Because especially with 6611, there's no new funding for housing in the cities.
That's not correct, because there's a long waiting list of people that live outside of New Haven that want to move to the city because there's not enough access to affordable housing in their own towns. I'm not worried about New Haven's growth. We're an incredible city. We are growing as a city. If anything, I'm concerned that there are more people that have means that are moving to our city, and that will begin to push even more and more pressure on people that are struggling to afford their own rents. That is not a concern of mine.
So should the fair share also fund housing in the city? So you're saying you don't?
I'll take extra support. We definitely need more funding for housing in New Haven as well.
Okay, but fair share doesn't support housing in the city, and you're okay with that?
To be honest, I am supportive of the work that's being done on fair share, but I don't know enough about the details of it to get into details. I'm more here because I spent time focusing on 1024.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor, you just said that that New Haven is subsidizing adjoining towns because it's got all the affordable housing. Did I read it? Did I hear you correctly?
Kind of. I wouldn't say we have all of the affordable housing, but we provide, our housing stock is 30% affordable. Most of the towns around us are in the single digits.
Okay, so because you have much more affordable housing than surrounding towns, you feel you're subsidizing the adjoining towns?
Correct.
Okay, because affordable housing costs money. It's not, you're not getting income from it. It's costing the city money, right?
I'm not exactly sure where you're going. In certain cases, it costs money. In others, it does not.
Okay, but you said that you're subsidizing towns that don't have it. So your city is spending money in order to maintain its affordable housing stock.
Correct, in many different ways, right?
Okay, so go ahead, I'm sorry.
In many different ways. So for example, we have a very large population of people that do not have a high income, that need to live in a place like New Haven because we are providing lower incomes through our housing stock. And therefore, we oftentimes need to provide additional support services as well.
Okay. So have you been listening to the testimony, or how much of the testimony have you heard?
I've been in and out all day. So I've listened to a bunch of it, but not all of it.
Okay, so if the city of New Haven is subsidizing the affordable housing, and it's costing money by providing additional services, then the people who have been touting affordable housing in small towns and other cities, who are claiming that it's going to be this big financial boom and that it's going to bring money into the towns, that is not the experience of New Haven, is it?
I think it's a combination. Again, by having additional development dollars in town, and I don't quite understand the issues around, for example, the questions of the tax issues. In the new building will bring in more building permit revenue, There will be more people living in the towns that can afford the taxes, but most importantly, affordable housing is a vital component to someone's success in being able to access a job in the first place. They'll have more disposable income to spend in someone's town, not to mention it'll make a town better because there's more diversity in the town.
Right, but it's costing New Haven money, and doing this, spreading it out across the state would cost every town and city in this state more money. It would not be an economic boom. You've just testified that that's New Haven's experience, that it costs money. It doesn't bring in money.
I think you're oversimplifying the issue. We're providing 30% of the region's affordable housing, and other towns around us are not.
Right.
I'm proud that we are doing that. And in certain cases, there is more of a burden on us, but in other cases, there's not. I think you're oversimplifying the issue.
Well, I'm just reciting what your testimony was, and if it costs New Haven money, and thankfully New Haven can afford it, it's going to cost other cities and towns money also, and it is not going to provide an economic boom as many have testified. I appreciate your time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would also mention that it's the right thing to do, Representative Dubinsky.
Thank you.
I see Representative Zullo's hand is up.
Thank you, Senator. And I'll be direct and very quick. Good evening, Mayor. It's always nice to see you. When you say that New Haven has or provides 30% of the housing stock is affordable, I assume you mean you're characterizing that according to the appeals list. In other words, the criteria that the state has promulgated, because we've heard testimony that you can't really quantify affordable because it depends on the family. So are you strictly referring to the affordable housing appeals list?
My understanding is it's the definition at the state level of, I think it's 60% AMI.
Okay. Because I just want to bring your attention to the different perspective of naturally occurring affordable housing. You know, East Haven is a direct neighbor to New Haven. And one of the things that makes East Haven such an attractive community is that we have an incredibly large housing stock that is affordable, especially for first-time home buyers, people who are first starting out as families. We do not get credit for that naturally occurring affordable housing stock because it doesn't necessarily meet that either the 60% criteria or any of the criteria on the affordable housing appeals list as far as being deed restricted or subsidized. And I'm curious what your opinion might be as far as, you know, an openness in some of these regulations to recognizing more of this naturally occurring affordable housing, or incentivizing investment in it and making it available so that people can take advantage of it. Because you're right, development is great. We want to bring development dollars in, but we also want to utilize the housing stock we have. It promotes conservation, it promotes redevelopment. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I appreciate that. I think that there's a lot of benefits to new development, and affordable housing has been an economic driver in many cases. It provides construction jobs, and residents aren't overburdened on rent, and so they can contribute to the economy in a meaningful way. I worry that there's the potential to get around some of the rules if we classify certain housing as affordable that might not be eligible, but I don't know the details of what the specific category you're talking about.
I only mention it because, as we were going through some of the testimony today, I was looking at some of the affordable housing programs or regulations that some towns have, and a lot of towns, not a lot, the towns that do promulgate these regulations develop these very specific formulas about plugging in, the housing value, the proposed mortgage amount, a utility allowance, and essentially deriving what the maximum house price would be in these affordable set-asides. And what I just can't wrap my head around is why a community can't do that for its entire housing stock. Affordable is affordable, whether you designate it as affordable and put a label on it or not. If $1,000 rent is deemed affordable for somebody, then it shouldn't matter if it's deed restricted, in my opinion, or if it's subsidized. And frankly, we should be striving for as little subsidized housing as possible, because we want to be reducing government costs, reducing reliance on government aid, not increasing it. And so, again, I just ask, what is your thought on, municipalities having the opportunity to audit their housing stock and find out what truly is affordable. If the goal is that we want housing at 60% AMI, and it turns out that a town has 18 or 20% of their housing stock at 60% AMI, I would say that we're meeting that goal. Wouldn't you agree?
It's not affordable if you don't make enough money. Affordable is typically subsidized to less than 30% of the income. We need more units with a federal subsidy.
You were just saying that you're saying, so then in that case, do you happen to know offhand how many of New Haven's affordable designated units or classified units are targeted at that 30% AMI number? And I realize that might not be fair to ask as you sit here.
Right, I can get the number to you, but I don't know off the top of my head.
All right. Well, I don't want to take up any more time. I know how to get you offline, and I look forward to actually doing that. I'm going to try and get in touch with you if you don't mind.
Thanks, Representative Sula.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. I don't see anyone else's hand raised.